Okay, so this is a quick tutorial on moving line work drawings from Revit into both Photoshop. We're going to cover both Photoshop and Affinity Photo because Adobe, while I love you, the cost of your software is crazy expensive. And so a lot of students are moving to Affinity Photo, which is a great solution. It's a great option for doing some really similar work. So we're going to cover both of those and look sort of briefly at some of the simple differences. So first things first, when we are in Revit, there's a few things that I always look to do in terms of line work drawing. So this in particular is looking at an elevation of Cliff House, which is an awesome project by Mackie Lines. And what we're working through in my Rep 2 course at Hammond School of Architecture. So, and let's take a quick look at that project here, just so we can kind of see what we're doing in terms of line work. So, what we need to start looking towards building, I've already got the basics on my line weights coming together. And again, that is under graphic display options. So I'm set to hidden lines. I have turned on smooth lines with anti-aliasing. Always get your silhouette lines set not to thin lines, but to wide lines. I believe that is off by default. So we're going to set that to wide lines. I am casting shadows to get a little bit of depth on the elevation, this little bit of shadowing across here. And I am turning the shadows way down. I believe by default that number is 60, which looks okay on screen, but prints out well, almost black. And so it's way too dark in terms of a shadow setting. So I drop all the way down to about 15 on the intensity of the shadows. Everything else I leave as is. Again, we're technical drawing here, so I'm not going to do something presentation-wise like sketchy lines or something like that. So that's my basic setting for the line work. And these are presentation drawings, not construction documents. So I do not want any of my elevation tags on. And as in terms of presentation drawings, that section mark is completely ridiculous for a presentation drawing. Way too big, way too bulky. So I need to get something like this coming together. The next thing you'll note on that image of the cliff house, there's this beautiful horizontal wood siding. So we want to get an idea of that as well. And there's a few ways to do that. I could come in and do, I believe we're under annotation, and I could do a filled region, which works great, but probably much faster to do that as a surface on my material. So to do that, I'm going to select one of my walls, and I'm going to edit the type, and I want to get its material, which is going to be located under the structure. So that's wood siding. So I already have that material set up. And your material graphics have two pieces, right? It has the appearance, this is how it's going to render, and the graphics, this is how it's going to be drawn. And underneath graphics, right now I don't have any surface pattern at all. So knowing that, I would like this to be a very controlled line, I'm going to set this to model, because here I can do a very precise 4-inch or even a 6-inch kind of line. So I know that lap siding is probably in that 4-inch neighborhood. So I'm going to set that to 4 inches. I'm going to make sure, Revit recently, within the last few years, set the default color as a medium gray, which I really appreciate. Typically, I don't want that set all the way to black. A medium gray is ideal for those lines. That way they show up in the background almost more like a light pencil hatching, which looks fabulous on these drawings. So my foreground surface pattern is going to be a 4-inch parallel. And that is going to be applied to every surface on my wood siding material. So if I say okay to that, and okay, and okay, you'll see immediately I have that light gray line. And if I go back to my west elevation, you'll see that's added that line in. And that line stays consistent. We're using that model pattern. That line is going to stay consistent regardless of my scale. right? So super, super important to understand that. So let's set this back to 1/8 of an inch. And let's go ahead and export this into my image editing software now. So I'm going to go File, Export, Images and Animation, and let's export this as Cliff House, West Elevation, and then I'm going to put the number 18 after it, which is the shorthand code for 1/8 inch scale. Save. So I've got my file type, location, save location, and name. Often I would use visible portion of current window, but that has been throwing off our scale for some reason in Revit. And I'm not exactly sure why, if there's a technical reason why, or if it's a bug in how the software is working, but I have not been able to have consistent scale. So make sure your export range is set to current window. Make sure your zoom is set to 100% because we need this to stay at 1/8 of an inch. My JPEG settings, I'm going to go to lossless and lossless. I don't want any compression. And I am building an image. I'm building a board, a presentation board at 150 DPI. Typically for school projects, 150 will be fine. It will be adequate. And I do that based off of experience in working with student laptops. If you're a higher end laptop, you can certainly go ahead and set that up to 300. But 150, while we're learning, 150 is a really good starting point for our resolution. It is perfectly adequate. So I'm going to say OK to that. And if I go to my desktop now at this point, I should have that file, Cliff House, West Elevation 18, as an image. Cool. So let's bring that into Photoshop first. So first things first, let's build our board. So that's going to be under File, New. I'm going to be working in inches, so I'm setting up a file that is 36 inches wide, 24 inches tall. And again, resolution, you always have to make sure you're matching your resolution. I was exporting from Revit at 150 DPI. I have to work that into a 150 DPI board. If I don't, then I'm actually going to be modifying the scale. The scale is going to be moving up or down based on the dots per inch or pixels per inch. So I need to make sure I'm consistent all the way across on DPI. I'm exporting at 150, and I'm importing that into a 150 DPI board. So I'm clicking the Create button. So I've got 36 by 24. At this point now, I can go ahead and open up that elevation. Cliff House West, ELE.18. I'm going to do a select all, edit, copy, and then edit, paste into my board. And this is a really good drawing to sort of position bottom right. And then I might bring this back up and put another section here, something like that, to start anchoring the bottom of this presentation board. So the next thing I want to do is start bringing in Entourage. And so this is, we're working only in 2D, so Entourage is pretty easy to work with. And one of the better websites that I've found here recently that allows you professional level and some free stuff is Mr. Cutout. So I'm using things directly from Mr. Cutout here on this. Some things that I've downloaded for free. So this is really simple tree, super nice looking, really highly detailed, and already removed from the background. So from here, I'm just going to do a select all, edit, copy, and then on my presentation board, edit, paste. And now I can move this in and position it. And I'm going to scale that up a little bit. So just a free transform, and let's do something like that. And position one here. I'm going to rename that layer tree. And so that was just a double click for the layer name. I'm going to double click this one as well. So this will be West Elevation. So obviously, if I look at this as an image, if that shows up, double clicking the hand zooms in everything. If I want that elevation drawing to be somewhat dominant here, I know that that green yellowish color, while pretty, is definitely overriding my ability to see that elevation. So I want to desaturate this. Essentially, I'm going to turn it black and white and then fade it out, put it in the background, and then I want it to show up behind this house as well. So I'm also going to let's duplicate that layer. Well, let's desaturate it first so I don't have to do that twice. So inside of Photoshop, I am going to go to Image, and I'm making sure I'm on my tree layer, Image, Adjust, and I'm simply going to run Desaturate. That turns it black and white. Then I'm going to go to Image, Adjust, Brightness, Contrast. I'm going to turn on Legacy. It's a harsher version of Brightness, Contrast, essentially. And I'm going to remove all the tonality out of it. And say OK. And then I'm going to change my layer opacity from 100 down to about 30 or so. So at this point, I'm ready to duplicate that layer, which is simply left-click, drag, and drop. And then I'm going to move this up so we have a slightly higher version up here as well. And just so it doesn't look quite the same, I'm going to do an Edit, Transform, Flip Horizontal, and let's just push its scale just a little bit as well. Transform, Scale, I'm just going to make it a little bit wider here. Something like that. Okay, so from here, a little bit of work that needs to happen. I'm going to take my eraser tool. Let's zoom out on the ground plane just a little bit. And I'm going to take my eraser tool and just remove, let's make sure I'm on the right layer. I am. Let's remove that little bit of that tree there, just like that. And then let's use the marquee selection tool. And I'm just going to select right around the perimeter of the elevation edge. And then back to my eraser tool again to get rid of that portion. And just because I always can't stop, got to erase this little portion of the tree too. So another little marquee selection right there. Select, deselect, let's zoom out. Much better. So that tree is now officially behind the house. And we need to do the same kind of thing right here. So again, the marquee selection, just so I have sort of nice edges in terms of what I'm deleting. Oh, I need to select the correct layer, so it's tree copy. There we go. There's that piece. And then I've set myself up for a slightly more difficult thing to do right here with the guardrails. But really, you know, if I take, this is the guardrail, the whole point of that guardrail design is to be somewhat transparent. So I can probably just pull this off by going erase where that structure is, select, deselect, and then let's erase all of that underneath that ground plane. And that actually looks fabulous right there. Super cool. Super happy with that. So really, really easy things to do in terms of bringing in trees. The other thing that I usually like to do as well is I'm going to vary the density, or not the density, but the opacity on the trees in the background, just so I can continue to build some depth. So if I want that tree to look like it's further away, I'm going to drop its opacity. If I want it to look like it's a little bit more in the foreground, I'm going to raise its opacity and just build a little bit of tonality behind that building and elevation. So let's do the same type of thing, but we'll use some people in Affinity here. So let's switch over. Similar process. We already have our things out of Revit. So let's go File, New. So in Affinity, I'm going to be building a new file with inches as my units. 36 inches wide, 24 inches tall. 150 is not in the drop-down list, so you actually just need to click on that field and type in 150 and then create. And so that's going to give me a 36-inch by 24-inch board. If your rulers are off, always need the rulers on for architecture, right? So it's under View and Show Rulers. And as long as I've built this document with inches as my unit, that should show up just fine. So from here, same kind of process. I'm going to go File and Open. And let's grab Cliff House, West Elevation, 18. Select All, Edit, Copy, and Edit, Paste. So we'll slide that right down. So in this case, let's go ahead and add a few people in. You know, somebody walking, getting ready to arrive home. So I believe I have somebody here. That's a tree. Those are kids at a table. Let's do a File, Open, and let's get our walkie person here. All right. So arriving home. So same technique as a tree here, right? I'm going to go select all, edit, copy, and edit, paste. Okay, so first thing we have is a slight scale problem, which is super easy to resolve. So we'll come here and select that layer, and we're just going to downsize in a couple of steps. So again, I'm making sure that that layer is selected. In fact, let's go ahead and rename this Walking Human. So, you know, again, always be paying attention to the size and scale of our figures, right? So right there's my ground plane. The initial height looked okay with the guardrail, but remember that's the height of my door, so that establishes a really good sense of what the height should be. And you know, a human, you know, typically most humans are not ducking when they go underneath the door. So we're going to set just underneath that height. And then just to kind of make this easy for this demo, let's go ahead and move said human right over here so that we're actually not having to deal with the guardrail too much. Okay, so modifying a layer inside of Affinity is a little bit different. You have some default brightness contrast things, but and really the Affinity system, while it is different than Photoshop, is really nice. It marries things to the layer and keeps it in your layer stack, so you can actually see what modifying does, and you can modify the modifications much quicker, really. So with that selected, Walking Human layer selected, I'm going to go to Effects. Oh, not Effects. Let's go to Adjustments. Sorry. And first thing I'm going to do again is let's go to black and white. So I'm going to go ahead and say just default black and white, and then collapse that flat back. And then I'm going to go to my brightness contrast, and I can click on any of these and it gives me sort of your default sliders. And we're going to go a reduction. Oh, I need to click linear here. There we go. Linear. And let's go with a reduction all the way in terms of that. And it looked like it was applying that to both layers. So let's go back. So these are stacked above my layer in Affinity, right? So it's applying those qualities to both. And I don't want that. I only want those happening to my Walking Human layer. Right, so dropping those underneath, that was just a drag and drop. Those effects are now only applied to this layer. And at any time, you know, I can come back in and adjust what those effects are doing, what those adjustments are doing, simply by adjusting the opacity of those effects over the top, which is really nifty. And again, if I move those out, you're seeing it's going to apply to everything in terms of the layering that happens below. So I just want those only working with my walking human layer. At that point, then I can take my walking human layer also, and let's select that layer, and let's adjust that layer's opacity so we have something a bit like that. And I really want to pull a little bit of additional contrast out of that. And let's go ahead and move that layer just behind our guardrail because that looks cool. And let's move, yeah, no, that looks about right, actually. I'm cool with that. There's certainly more work that I could start to do, but zooming out sort of puts that in context for what's happening on the overall board, and that gives you a really good idea of where we can start to work these boards and these drawings to build really quickly nice presentation drawings. Obviously, a lot more that I need to do. Trees, people, I need to start adding in a gradient underneath this to sort of lock that down at the bottom of the page and let that read really nicely as ground plane. All those things are coming up in the next tutorials.